come today not to speak at length, but just briefly, a handful of minutes, on two subjects. To speak briefly on some surveys from the past, and briefly on a noble task that's ahead of you this year. In 1784, I served as a member of our Confederation Congress, and I proposed two laws for the governance and the surveying of those lands, to provide an organized system of government and a rectilineal grid for surveying. The final results of the Confederation Congress looked much different from what I originally proposed, but they still did provide for a system of representative government in those lands and a measured rectilineal grid to allocate the lands first for our veterans and then for others. 30 years later, after the successful completion of our second war for American independence, what you've come to know as the War of 1812, but what we called Mr. Madison's War, we faced the same problem of how do we compensate the men who had fought so long and hard in that conflict, because we, again, had not the funds to do that. But we did have, once again, the lands in the West, this time on the western side of the Mississippi, that vast tract of Louisiana that I had acquired from France a dozen years before. But we had no survey for that land outside the Spanish land grants, which we preferred not to use. At this point enters into the picture one Joseph C. Brown. And I did not know Mr. Brown. I know him only by the reports of others. He was 40 years younger than I, came from Virginia, made his home in St. Louis sometime during the course of Mr. Madison's War. He was about 25 years old. And he went on to have a significant career in surveying in a variety of capacities west of the Mississippi River. And perhaps one of the most notable was his establishment of the baseline for the 5th principal meridian in 1815. It became the point of beginning for surveys in the western lands, surveys that would go as far north as into the northern Dakotas, having their point at the beginning of the intersection of those two lines. And I'm told that Mr. Brown is buried in St. Louis, that his burial place is known, but that his grave is unmarked. There could be a near universal need, desire for the marking of one's final resting place, provided either by the individual himself or by descendants or survivors. It was that way for me. In 1773, I was just 30 years old. My best friend, Dabney Carr, died, and I buried Dabney Carr on a hilltop. At the time, I was living in a one-room brick cottage on that hilltop. It would later come to be known as Monticello, as I added more buildings to that site. And that's where I was interred some 50 years later. But the year before my death, I designed the monument which was to mark my grave. And I wrote the epitaph that was to appear upon that monument, recording the 3 things for which I wish to be remembered. I am told that that burial place still exists yet today, that my memorial still stands today as it did in 1826. And I'm here today to make an appeal to the Missouri Society of Professional Surveyors to do for Joseph Brown what for some reason he or his descendants were not able to do, and that is to provide a marker for his final resting place. Not only to memorialize his accomplishments, his surveying in Missouri and the western lands, but to do so in this, the 200th anniversary, the bicentennial year of the establishment of the 5th principal meridian. Does Joseph Brown have surveyors among you today within Missouri, within our lands? I do not know, but it is reasonable that he would have. And should you be able to so memorialize his grave, it could only help, couldn't help but be a great source of satisfaction to them, the honor that you have accorded to their ancestor. So So I would challenge you. I would encourage you, citizens and fellow surveyors and members of the Missouri Society of Professional Surveyors, to give yourselves in this year to the task of memorializing the grave of Joseph Brown, one of your fellow surveyors, and a notable man in the early history of your profession in the territory of Missouri. Thank you very much. I remain your servant.